Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again, and since at this point the Spectral Throw Molten Strike Pathfinder elemental character is pretty much perfected or ramped up as much as possible for the current gearing I'm going to do for it, I can happily show you quite a few clips about the gameplay of the character, taking on some high tier maps, some beyond action, as well as all of the Guardians and Shaper with Uber Siri as well. This is just a bit of the gameplay action with shield charge as I ended up swapping into over Whirling Blades. Since you're a Pathfinder, you do have a fairly decent amount of movement speed, got a lot of attack speed, and overall shield charge just feels a lot better for this build. And it's the first time I've ever really taken shield charge to a Spectral Throw type build, because traditionally I've always used Whirling Blades, but this one seems to work out really well, and this is the point you can see at which I'm still using Whirling Blades. This is a day earlier, and this is running some fully sextanted up, double beyond, pretty insane rolled scriptoriums. Now, you can see that the Pact Leech, as well as the defensive capabilities of the character, and the offensive capabilities make it a pretty damn good all-rounder. I very, very rarely die in this character, including Guardians, Shaper, Uber Siri. It is just a really well-balanced character for today's current endgame content. Thanks to the high amount of life, the Pact, the pretty much 100% uptime on Flasks under every situation, and the playstyle of itself. So you got your Spectral Throws, your Molten Strike, it all ends up being pretty damn well balanced. And this here is a tier 16 Vile Temple with a few map mods on it, nothing too serious. And then here we have some Uber Siri action jumping straight into the end game content. So as you can see, like I said, it's really quite safe. I'm just charging into everything, proccing Fortify very easily with shield charge, and then you just Spectral Throw everything you think you need to, and toss out the occasional Molten Strike when you think you need just a little bit of extra single target against a rare or Harbinger pack or whatever it may be. So the playstyle feels to me a little nicer than my usual Spectral Throw builds because we have that Molten Strike single target on demand, whereas when you just have Spectral Throw, you have to stand there and Spectral Throw something for a little bit longer since it's not the greatest of single target without slow proj in it. Whereas here, you just dive in, do your Molten Strike bullshit, and then attack AoE with your Spectral Throw whenever you feel like you need to. So the dual 6-link action here with the Tempest Binding has felt just incredible, and I do highly recommend it when trying out your own Spectral Throw builds. If you can't get a Tempest Binding because, well, I don't know, they're hard to get in the future or on whatever league you're on right now, then I would say a Thunder Fist setup while still maintaining a 6-link for Molten Strike is probably the best way to go about these Spectral Throw characters right now. At least for my feel, I think that's definitely the right answer. And you can see the Molten Strike really going to work with some serious single target damage. There isn't anything too absurd about my build at this stage, it's just Molten Strike scaling that's fairly crazy. My foil, however, is really quite good, and the jewelry is nothing too impressive, at least not anything you shouldn't be able to make yourself. It's pretty much just the fact that we have Molten Strike, the projectile, threshold jewels, and a Dying Sun, and then try and perfect your gear as much as possible around that, and it becomes a really insane single target, basically no matter what you do with it, whether it's this build, Brutus Lead Sprinkler, whatever Molten Strike, as long as you incorporate those sorts of things into the build, you will have very juicy single target. And this is just an example against some of the Guardian maps, just what kind of DPS we have and the playstyle, because for the most part I can face tank just about all of these with the amount of leech, defense, DPS I have, and I've been running pretty crazy Guardian maps here or there, not really shying away from almost any map mod except for Early Reflect because just plain can't do that. But with the leech we have and the playstyle of the Molten Strikes constantly hitting non-stop with the amount of balls you have, you're just about immune to damage as long as you're getting damage in. It's very similar to a Blade Vortex style Vile Pact character, whereas as long as you're attacking and doing a bit of damage, it's very hard to die as long as you don't get one shot. Here's an example of a Minotaur with Ghosted Necro mod. Now, the start of this fight, I did get randomly one-shot by a rock, but then I came back in, popped all my flasks and everything, had Fortify up, and after that, it was just fine. Didn't have Fortify up the first time, and that's probably where it went wrong. And then over here we have some Chimera action, which is incredibly smooth. I've done some pretty nasty chimeras on this character, and you can face tank chimera himself, as exhibited here. You can dash around between the smoke packs really quickly, really easily, and then the ads, they can be a bit dangerous, but if you've got the right, mindset, the right playstyle to go with them, and play fast enough, they die incredibly quick, and you can tank some of them. Just try not to tank too many at once, and you can see that the DPS is good enough that you can jump around to all 3 portals, get all 3 of the gates down, rather than just camping one gate like I normally would with my strategy. And the amazing thing here is Pathfinder as well. Every single pack I kill, every 3 of these mobs or so, pretty much tops my flasks back up. So you can maintain flasks even throughout ad phases, and in between the chimera phases, just flasks non-stop. It's truly incredible. So when you ask why Pathfinder, why not Raider, it is truly because the gameplay and the playstyle of Pathfinder is just that much more comfortable than anything else, including Raider. And then lastly, we come upon Shaper, and the DPS here is pretty respectable. It's by no means the biggest DPS I've ever had, and I am still missing 3 additional projectile Molten Strike Helm enchant, which would go a long way to adding about 30% DPS and make it look just a bit crazier. But this is very fine and very respectable, and as I said, you do pretty much get to maintain flasks whenever you need them against this fight, so it's very convenient. And then this guy here, you can face tank him and you pretty much get your flasks back after killing him, as well as topping up on ads real quick. And overall, just the smoothness, the fast shield charge of this playstyle makes Shaper, for me at least, pretty damn comfortable. Just got to pick your right moment, get your attacks in, and as well as that, you can face tank everything. You can face tank the beam, the balls, as long as you have your leech going, your attacks going, it's pretty damn comfortable. I think we have an example of that coming up in a second. And just along that point of the Raider again, it is a little bit more damage ultimately when I've Path of Building'd it, but it's something like maybe 10% more damage while losing the sustainability and the niceness of flasks. So personally, I think this Pathfinder playstyle and build is a lot nicer with the flasks, and then not having to squeeze your passive tree for frenzies as much, but it is up to you, and you can still play it as a Raider, maybe even a few other ascendancies. Just use this as a sort of template and make your own build if you really want to. But let's dive into what I've changed in the last few days. So I think by now I have pretty much perfected this character as much as I possibly can, and it has hit level 92. It is a Pathfinder, 6200 life. Defense is nothing too special, 25% evasion, 30% dodge, and the resists over here you can see currently at 108 for cold and lightning, and then my fire resist is undercapped by a good margin. That's because when I press all my flasks, I'm at 150 overcapped for all of them, so that's with the Dying Sun and Wise Oak. So I have triple capped my resist to make triple advantage use of the Wise Oak, giving us 14% penetration and 10% damage reduction to all of the above. And that does mean that it's a little bit dangerous if you don't have your flasks up, but that has not affected me at all yet. And like I said, the flask sustain is basically 100% across the board everywhere, always. So the playstyle is definitely charge around, 1, 2, 3, 4, charge around, 1, 2, 3, 4, just about always having your flasks up. The triple capping, it is a little bit tough, but if you have enough items with craftable suffix, like these resists over here, not this, here, if you have enough of them, you can pretty much easily balance your resists by spending a good 20-30 minutes in your hideout, just having a look at your different resists and your gear and then getting to it. It can be a bit intimidating, but trust me, it's very doable. I've done it on like 6 characters now. It just is a bit of time staring at your gear and figuring out exactly which numbers you need where. Now, as I said, the character is pretty much complete at this point, but the only thing I didn't really manage to get is 3 additional projectile Molten Strike Helm enchant. I ran something like 10, 15 Uber Labs maybe, and this is the best enchant I got, which is pretty nice for my clear speed. But the 3 additional Molten Strike projectiles, if you can get that, will increase your output by something like 30%, I think. You go from 9 projectiles to 12, because currently we have 7 over here. With Dying Sun we have 9, and then with the enchant you'd have 12. So it's very noticeable, it's very good, but if you can't get it, no big deal, it's been fine for me. Now, I did upgrade my foil over here, which is just about as good as you can possibly get at this point. And I did mention in the last video we're using foils because typically you'll be able to get a much better DPS foil than a claw. and ultimately I think it is a nicer build when fully ramped up than the claw version, unless you have a really good claw, which is somewhat unlikely. So over here I bought this foil when it did not have cold damage on it, and it was going for 2 exalts. I paid 2 exalts for it, I then exalted it and got cold damage, which took it from like 330 elemental DPS I think to 390. So it's about as good as it can possibly be at this point, whereas the foil I was using before that, I paid 10 chaos for it. It had full suffixes, so it had accuracy instead of the attack speed, annulled the accuracy, put on attack speed, and it ends up being something like a 350 DPS foil. These still aren't too expensive, you know, anywhere from 10C to about an exalt at this stage, and it's not that big a difference. I did expect a lot more damage upgrade out of this, but it's really not that substantial. You can see here, Molten Strike 58,000 and 25,000 here. You put this on and we're at 54,000 and 24,000. So overall, it's something like a 5 to 10% damage difference, so don't be too intimidated by my foil. It's by no means carrying my build, it's just nice to have as a well-rounded thing. And the more attack speed you can get, if you can get up to 2, it makes the build feel a lot smoother and nicer. So while this one has the good damage, it's a little bit slower and does feel a little bit worse because of that. Now aside from that, there really isn't too much else to mention as far as the gear changes. I crafted my own rings using Essence of Suffering and whatever else, and the fire damage to attacks, that's the essence I used. Got a life roll, maybe a couple of resists, and that's about it. And same with this one, just reused it from my Ice Shot character. So these opals really are not that impressive, they're just nice well-rounded rings. If you get a bunch of elemental damage to attacks, or higher Ellie rolls, you can get a lot more damage out of your rings, but these are just what I've got and what I'm sticking to. And then the amulet, a bit of crit multi and fire damage to attacks, paid something like 30 chaos for this one. Can put crit on there, but I need the resist to triple cap my Wise Oak. So there is more to be gained there if you really want to go hard on that. But my gloves, self-crafted those, try and get a pair of gripped gloves. With attack speed on it, I managed to self-craft those with something like 70 life on it. I then exalted them and got the hybrid life. Pretty lucky. Don't expect to get gloves this good, I don't think. Not as gripped anyway. It may be a bit hard, but maybe you can anyway. It's they're realistic enough if you're not looking for gripped. It's just a little bit of a fine-tuning otherwise. And then the belt, you try and get the elemental damage to attacks, reduce flask charges, increase duration. That's all really good stuff. If you can't get it all, then at least elemental damage and reduced flask charges goes a long way, I'd say, to making the build nice. And of course, Tempest Binding. Like I said, this is the reason that we can now have a Spectral Throw and a Molten Strike. So make sure you try and get one of these. And like I said, if you can't get one, then Thunder Fists are a good little compromise. You just have, you know, your Spectral Throw on a 5-link with added lightning instead of Tempest Binding. I think that's the way a Raider can work best, because then you still have Frenzy Charge sustain while wearing Thunder Fist. You don't need a Tempest Binding that way, but overall I think this is a nicer setup. And when I talked about my Molten Strike setup last time, there are, you know, little things you could change here or there to make it better, maybe different. At the moment, I am sticking to this setup, which is just Molten Strike, added cold damage. If you put in Immolate instead of this, it'd have more damage. Multi-Strike, elemental damage with attacks, Conk Effect, and Crit Strikes. Crit Strikes, according to Path of Building, is our weakest gem by far, but there's just no way I'm getting rid of it. I don't care what the DPS tooltip there says. We currently have, on our Molten Strike, 50 crit without power charges. I will rarely have power charges against bosses, and then with Diamond Flask, you know, that goes up to something like 75, let's just say. If you take that out, you have a really low crit number. Now, apparently, you know, over the course of a bunch of attacks, on average, Ellie Focus will be more damage, but that just isn't enough crit consistency, and you will run into attacks and strings of attacks where you just don't crit something and it feels really bad. So I think Crit Strikes is worth using there, but it's probably the weakest of your links, so bear that in mind if you've only got a 5-link. Now when it comes to our flasks, the staple here are Diamond, Wise Oak, and Ruby, Dying Sun, Ruby Flask. At Series Promise, not really that necessary. That's entirely up to you if you want to fit in something like a Taste of Hate, a Basalt, Quicksilver, whatever you want to do. You can have something else there. It's really not that necessary for us anymore. It's just a good bit of damage for the chaos damage we gain. And then the only other thing I really have to talk about in the setup is our current reservation. So I am all the time running Assassin's Mark on Blasphemy and Herald of Ice attached to Onslaught. You can combine them in a curse on hit sort of setup with Assassin's Mark, but then you won't have Assassin's Mark on single target a lot of the time. I think this is fine for our mana usage. When you really want to go heavy single target damage, you get rid of Herald of Ice and then you put in Anger. That is a lot more damage, and it's when Herald of Ice is not really necessary on the single target anyway. Besides that, I do still like to have Blasphemy there. I think it's entirely up to you guys how you reserve it, but this is how I've come up with my own most comfortable reservation. But as far as the passive tree goes, there were a few little changes. So I've dropped this entire area over here because I decided it wasn't quite efficient enough if I wasn't needing the claw nodes or some of the stuff around this area, and if I was going through Varpact. So I went through here and dropped all of this, and it did end up gaining me a bit of freedom for points. So dropped all of that, still got some life over this way. It made better use of my life nodes over here anyway. Picked up Berserking and then also Leech. Now these Leech nodes made my actual survivability infinitely better. So I could live without them and it was fine, but this means that just about every single of my ball projectiles is going to leech me to full every time, and it means I can face tank a lot more in the game out there. So I do recommend it if you have the few points to spare. Like I said, you can go without it, but it's not really worth it. Then I also picked up these little crit nodes over here. Otherwise, the passive tree has not really changed. My jewels over here are wildfires, and then the jewels I've picked over here, basically just attack speed, projectile damage jewels, so I could feel a bit better about my attack speed and my shield charge. And then lastly, I'll show you the path of building. At this point, 580k. Apparently this is per ball, not incorporating 3 balls, so, you know, a lot more than that. I don't know, just use it as a frame of reference. 580k per ball is what I have over here. And if you go against a Shaper or some shit, 350k per ball. And then I have 7 balls, Dying Sun, 9 balls. I don't know, it's a lot of damage. It looks like a lot, it feels like a lot. That's all we really need to say about that. I will give you the tree, the link and all that, and you can fuck around with it at your will if you want. And if you're going Raider, I won't really make a tree for you. Basically, all you do is just take in some Frenzy nodes. You take those two, you take those two. If you're going Raider, you'll grab Avatar of Slaughter and Avatar of the Veil. And you probably want to stay around here instead of respecing to how I did, because then you can grab another Frenzy, and you'd probably remove, you know, this and probably even this to make back those 6 points. But I really do thoroughly enjoy the Flask uptime, and I thought it was a pretty good use of Pathfinder Ascendancy in this current Raider and Berserker meta. So that's it for the character, I'd say. It was actually, unironically, probably the best character and funnest character I've played this league. I love me some Spectral Throw, and Molten Strike is pretty nice, fun addition to it for the single target and the damage. I guess Cosplay is probably a funner character, but this one just felt like it was more well-rounded, and thus led to a nicer clear on the end game. Thus, a little bit funner, I'd say, for the end game as a more well-rounded character. I'd say that's about it though, guys. Hope you enjoyed the build. I might even do a write-up for this. I don't know. Feels like it's kind of worth it. For now though, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.